and welcome to our talk on fast world building, building them worlds fast. So we're going to be talking through ProBuilder and also the updates to the terrain system. So my name's Liz. I'm part of the Evangelist team in Europe, and I'm just going to be talking about the terrain system with you today. And I'm joined by the lovely...
My name's Dan Miller. I'm based here in America on the evangelism team and focus on AR and VR.
So just like the agenda for the talk today, so I'm just going to be going over the terrain system. So who here has used the Unity terrain system before? Awesome. Cool. So what I'm going to do is actually just go straight from the beginning. So if you're here and you haven't used the Unity terrain system before, it's just going to be like an intro to the Unity terrain system, which is cool. But for those of you that have used it, I'm going to throw in the updates from 2018.3 as well. Oops.
And then after that, I'll just be talking about ProBuilder, how you can take that terrain system as kind of a foundation, build on top of it, and add just a little bit of art to your existing content.
So, terrain. So like I said, I'm going to start from the beginning. We're going to talk about what terrain assets are and what tiles and patches are, because patches are quite useful when we kind of look at the performance enhancements a little later and how it works under the hood. And then we're going to have a look at the tooling. So if you've not used Unity before, the Unity terrain system before, we're going to be looking at the brushes, the palettes, and how you can get started with sort of molding and painting the terrain. For those of you that have used it before, you may see these new things here, like connecting terrain and also the terrain stamps. And then finally, we're just going to have a little look at, my little clicker's broken, at the performance. So how everything has kind of changed to GPU instancing, which is super cool. So let's pop into the editor. Aha. So we've just got a empty scene here in Unity, and we've just got a first-person camera control in there. So a little bit later, we can have a little walk around and look at our finished environment, which is cool. So to get started, we just right-click, we go to 3D Object, and we go to Terrain, which you can see here in the drop-down. So these updates from Terrain 0.3, it isn't like an extra thing that you would download or in the package manager. It's just building on the existing terrain that you all know and love if you've used it before. So, did I hear someone snort when I said love? So here we have our terrain, and this creates a terrain asset in our project. And this is a terrain tile. And a terrain tile is made up of a collection of tile patches. And that will come in useful a little bit later. And it's just nice to know. So if any of you have checked out the new blog, it sort of talks about terrain assets, terrain tiles, terrain patches. It's just a little bit of terminology that I think helps. So with your terrain tool, with your terrain selected, you can see that we have this selection of tools for you available to get started. So the first one is the brush tool. So there's a selection of super cool stuff that we can do with the brush tool. The whole tool set is kind of a whole new layout. It's a lot more intuitive and easy for you to fine tune and switch between the brush settings. So what we're going to start with first is raising and lowering the terrain. So we have this brush palette that has a lot of preset brushes for us available to use. And so what we can do is with a brush selected, we can start painting on the terrain. And what you'll see here is that we have this cool preview of how the terrain's going to look once we place it. So if we change our brush size, so the area which it covers, and our opacity, which is effectively the strength, we can see that this is also reflected in the preview that we get there. So we can just paint across. And it's a lot quicker as well than before, which is super nice. So one of the things that's new is that we now have the ability to create our own brushes. So if you have any PNG images that you're wanting to use as a mask to be able to create your brushes, there's actually this new brush button here. And if we select it, we can actually browse all of our 2D textures. So we have one in here which is a canyon kind of shape. So I'm just going to double click to add that. And then we can select it from our brush palette. So where is it, this one? So I'm just going to call this Canyon Brush. Doo-doo. So if I select on our new Canyon brush that we've just created, we can see here that we're using a PNG image as the mask texture. And what we've done is we've brought that into Unity as a default type. But what we suggest to use it effectively in the new Terrain system is that you actually set the format to this new either R16-bit or R8 format that we have now. It just helps for like the performance, not the performance, sorry, sort of the cleanness of how it prints and draws. So if I select the Terrain tool and we go back to this Canyon brush, we can see here that this creates the preview as before. We can pop that down and we can start overlaying that. If you see that we get this weird kind of like grid effect, what you can do is, if I rename the wrong brush, that might be what I've done. Yeah, so if you get this weird kind of grid effect like you see here, it could be your radius. So I find if I just kind of scale the radius scale of the brush to something that fits, it just prints a lot more cleanly. There's a lot more settings available for you to get started. And then as before, it's shift to kind of lower the terrain. Oh, there we go. Okay. So sort of similarly on that vein, a new thing is if you have a PNG that you're thinking would make better as like a terrain stamp rather than a brush, something that you can just place with a click, we also have support for that too. So I've got this mountain image, and again, it's a PNG that's been set up with this R16 format. So let's call this mountain brush. And I'm just going to alter the radius again there. And then what we can do now is, with the new mountain brush selected, we can actually select stamp terrain. And what this does is it allows us to, as the name suggests, just stamp that PNG image straight onto the terrain there. And again, you can change the brush size, so that's kind of the area of effect, and the opacity of the strength. And also the stamp height as well if you want a crazy tall mountain. Why not? Why ever not? Now you can just stamp that. Beautiful. I'm going to give you a link a little bit later on to have access to these brushes that we've already set up, and also some cool new experimental ones as well. So that is your terrain and your brushes. Fancy. So then the next thing that we're going to talk about is painting your textures. So now we have this idea of terrain layers. And so what terrain layers are is a way for you to be able to create materials independent of the terrain object. So you can create lots of these layers and just reuse them across the terrain. So you can either create your own, or if you're using them in different projects, you can import them in. So for example, if I select to edit terrain layers and add a layer, we've actually got some terrain layers already set up that are from the Book of the Dead demo. Has anyone downloaded that and had a look? Yeah, it's so cool. All that terrains. You can actually download that and have a look at all the sort of materials and things in there as well. So if I select just the floor sticks layer from the Book of the Dead demo, you can see that it applies it to the terrain straight away. So then, if I go back to the terrain layer and select it, we can add our own as well. So if I say create a layer, if you have a collection of textures that you're wanting to use, so for example, I have this grass texture here, I can select that. And then, so this is going to be, it's probably going to be saved as a new terrain layer, isn't it? Has it gone? New layer 1. Where are you? There he is. New layer 1. So I'm just going to change this to grass layer. And then you can see that with this, oh, now he's gone. You can see that with this selected, boop, you can add your normal maps to them as you would if you were creating your materials. So we could just, let's add that one. And then you can also adjust your specular, your metallic smoothness, and also your, the size of the tiling settings and that kind of stuff. So then with this done, if we return to the terrain, we can then paint this onto the terrain too. And depending on the target strength, and also the brush size and your opacity, you can blend those layers quite nicely together as well, which is really nice. It just makes it so much easier. So and you can create as many of these tile layers as you want, share them across projects. Just the thing to bear in mind is that if you do have a terrain layer that you're then sharing across projects, if you do adjust any of these, I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but if you do adjust any of the settings for the terrain layers to suit your current terrain, it is going to those changes are going to flow out to the other terrains that are using that terrain layer. So speaking of other terrain, we have our little lonely piece here. Aww. And then if we want to add terrain, neighboring terrain that we can then paint or sculpt across, previously, we would have to connect our terrain layers in this way using code. But now, again, under our brush settings, we have something called Create Neighbor Terrains. And with this selected, it brings up this grid that allows us to simply select and click, and it's going to create a neighboring terrain that you can, again, use these tile palettes on. I think I've just made like a long, long terrain by accident. So then with this selected, I can go to the brush, and I can just start sculpting across, and it lines up perfectly. Ooh, there we go. And similarly, if I want to paint, I can add that terrain layer that we just created, the grass layer, and I can paint that on too. So it's all seamless across terrain, which is super cool. So whenever I'm kind of talking to the community about terrain, and especially with the new terrain enhancements that we've been teasing for a while, everyone always asks me if we're still going to be supporting SpeedTree. And the answer is yes. So for those of you who haven't used SpeedTree before, there's actually this option in the terrain to paint trees. And you can download SpeedTree from the asset store. And then once your package is installed, you can pop to this tab, and you can select Edit Trees and add a tree. There it is. So SpeedTree comes with a lot of different trees that you can use. I like the conifer the best, so I'm going to use that one. And then we can just add it to our tree palette here. And there's lots of different settings. So the brush size is sort of the area of effect of where it's going to paint the trees. Tree density is how many. And then you can randomize the tree height. And then, much like painting on the textures, you can just place the trees, which is very nice. Just something to bear in mind, though, is that the new Terrain system, which I forgot to mention at the beginning, is compatible with our lightweight and high-definition render pipelines. And so is SpeedTree. But the only thing that isn't is the tree movement. So that's just something to bear in mind if that's what you're after. So then, if we pop along to the terrain settings, just finally to wrap up this part on terrain, there's just a few new settings in here, which I think would be quite useful to know. So the first is this auto connect. So this is if we do create these neighbor terrains, as long as they have the same grouping ID, it's going to automatically connect them. If you've created a lot of terrain tiles that you then want to group together, as long as they're the same grouping ID, you can select this reconnect button, and it will pop them together so that you can sculpt and paint across the tiles. Along with that as well, actually, which is pretty cool, is that previously, if you were going to be changing the resolution of your height maps, it would, because of the way that the terrain system rendered, it like worked at the time, if you made any changes to the resolution, you kind of lose the terrain that you'd created. Now, what we can do is we can change the resolution of the height maps and resize them, and this updates straight away. So this is very nice. Along with that is this new checkbox, which is draw instanced. So the way that the terrain system used to work, I hope you remembered about what I mentioned earlier. So the way that the terrain system used to work is for each of the sort of breakdowns of a tile map, it used to create a custom mesh for it. So there'd be like a lot of draw calls and a lot of intensity on the CPU, while all of these tiles were generating custom meshes. So now what has actually happened is that a lot of the heavy terrain data, like your height maps or your splat maps for blending your textures, is actually stored as a texture on the GPU. And then instead of creating these custom terrain meshes, what we do is we take copies and we use that texture, we sample that texture to be able to recreate that terrain. So by using GPU instancing, we're taking a lot of the hard work from the CPU, and it's a lot less draw calls than creating those custom meshes. So with this selected, and you can see straight away that by doing per pixel, that it really sharpens up your terrain. A cool side effect of this as well is that it's just faster for load times because you're not cranking out all those custom terrains when you start your project. And then just like the final bit I'm going to say about this is that, like on the top of that, now your terrain normals are decoupled from your actual terrain mesh and sampled through the pixel shader. So with this per pixel, you can actually change your pixel error. And so if it's sort of at 1, that means that the normal map that's been created, the normals that have been created is like 1-to-1 with the terrain. So you've got lots of kind of visual tools to mess around with now and make something super beautiful, which is great. So back to my presentation. So coming soon. So I mentioned earlier about these experimental brushes. We are adding more to this Git repository, so if you want to download these and have a play, we're actually looking at having mesh stamps, so the ability to place meshes, not just using PNGs. There's a random brush, and there's all sorts in there that the Awesome Terrain team have been working on. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're actually going to be looking at support for the SpeedTree movement for lightweight and HD.
All right, thanks a lot, Liz. I know personally the Terrain is kind of one of the older systems in Unity, and I haven't really touched it in a while, so I'm excited that some of these updates are coming, and it's not necessarily like a new Terrain system, it's just kind of the same old stuff, but better. So what I'm going to be talking about today is ProBuilder. And if you're not familiar, ProBuilder was kind of acqui-hired by Unity, so it's now part of the Unity family, and it's freely available to you. And what ProBuilder can do is it's really good for things like gray boxing, laying out and building structures, as well as kind of putting some final touches with adjusting some UVs specifically on your mesh to get you that nice look. At its core, it's kind of a geometry manipulation tool that allows you to do basic things like extrusions, adjust UVs, lay out kind of unique polygon shapes, and then even have procedural shapes to get you started with certain structures or buildings. And while I'm not going to be touching on it too much, there's also other tools within the ProBuilder suite, and one of these is Polybrush. And what this allows you to do is manipulate and sculpt specific objects within Unity, as well as do things like scatter meshes if you want to get that nice randomized look and feel, as well as blending textures and painting on top of it. And on the same vein, there's something called ProGrids, which is kind of a more robust snapping feature and tool within Unity that allows you to really line things up, adjust grid sizes on the X, Y, and Z, and have some nice visualizations there. And of course, where you can get it, all of these are available freely on the Asset Store. They're now published under Unity Technologies. And if you're using the latest version of the editor or 2018.1 and above, both ProBuilder and ProGrids are available via the package manager. So you can just start your project, grab those right away. And while Polybrush is still in beta, I'll be telling a little bit later news about this specifically, and it will be coming to the package manager. All right, so now I'm going to hop in the editor and build upon that terrain that Liz made. And I will say, I think Liz's portion was a little more fleshed out, and mine's going to be kind of freestyling, but it's turned out all right in the past. So what I'm going to try to do is find a nice little spot here. And similar to how Liz has kind of laid out the editor here, I've actually got my own little unique layout for ProBuilder as well. All right, so now I'm kind of off in the distance here, so we need to relocate. But what you might notice here is that I'm looking at the scene, and I now have this window here at the bottom that is specific to ProBuilder. So once you import this into your project, there's going to be a little tools drop down that allows you to select that. And what we want to do here is we want to just start building objects in our scene. So to do that, I'm going to go and click on the new shape tool to kind of get me something to get started with. And so by default, we're going to start with a cube, and I'll be talking a little bit about some other shapes that we can use. But the cool thing here is that we have kind of different dimensions that we can start out and kind of adjust things based on what we want to start with. For now, I'm just going to keep it at 1 and kind of adjust and manipulate it as I go. So at the top of the UI here, we actually have 4 different selections here. The one on the far left that I have now is objects, vertices, edges, and faces. And so to start, what I want to do is start adjusting some of the faces and just build this up into more of a wall. So we can do that. Kind of drop it down here into the ground. We can get this face. I'll raise it up first. Whoop. There, oh, too many clicks. All right. Let's see if we can maybe start a new shape and adjust some of that here. Or I'll maybe go off to the side a little bit, like that. And I'm selecting the edges so we can pull it up and pull it out. Unity didn't like that first cube. So here we go. And of course, if we go back to object mode, it's similar to just selecting it as you would. So we can go ahead and just delete that in the scene. And now we have kind of half a wall here. Now, what I want to do here is kind of build up maybe like a ruined castle or something like that. So in order to do that, I want to go and first create a couple edge loops on this object specifically. And so something to keep in mind about the ProBuilder window down here is that it is context sensitive. So whether you're selecting an object, an edge, vertices, you're going to see different options on really what's possible in that current mode. So for here, now that I've selected this edge, I can actually go and insert an edge loop. So right here, we have this button like that, and now we can just kind of adjust it to where we want. So I'll do that, select this edge again, insert a couple of these, and these will be used for kind of adding those little top pieces to our broken down castle. And again, this is kind of just normal kind of 3D modeling where you want to create some edge loops so that you have some good faces to select. So if we zoom back out here, we can go here, and now I can just go and start selecting some of these faces. And then using the hotkeys, we can actually go and extrude these. So for this, I'm just going to hit Command E to extrude, and now we kind of have a little bit of a castle wall. So if we want to make sure and try to make it look a little more dated, we can kind of maybe pull this out here, rotate it around, something like that. And next thing I want to do is just kind of take this object, so I'm selecting it, and I'm just going to create a duplicate of it, maybe turn it around a little bit, rotate it, something like that. And we'll be coming back to these in a moment. But the next thing I want to do is I just want to create kind of a door or something in between these. So again, starting with my new shape here, we can now go and look at all the different options here. So there's everything from stairs, which I'll show you guys in a little bit, to things like a pipe shape. And again, these are all set up and ready to start being either expanded upon or edited in ProBuilder. And for this one, we're going to go down to this door shape. So I have kind of run through this demo in this specific project a couple of times. You might have noticed some extra terrain from when Liz was doing hers as well. So some of these settings are actually what I modified it to previously. So if we were creating a lot of doors or a lot of stairs, those settings actually get maintained. And that's kind of things like, again, the door height, the total width, stuff like that. So for now, we'll just kind of keep it at what I had it for the previous time. And of course, we can kind of rotate it and move it around. Now, you might notice that the door, by default, actually has some kind of open edges here on the side. And so, of course, there's tools for closing that up. And for this, we're just going to go through and show it a couple times. So I can select these two edges there, and then we can actually kind of combine them using the, where is it? Oh, I need to make sure I have both of them selected. So select one, and then select the other here, and it is not the fill hole because that's looking for more than just two. And I believe it is the, let's see it here. All right. Well, we could kind of extrude these edges out if we wanted, so we could do something like that, and then just pull it down like that as well. So, of course, there's always a couple different ways you can do it, and again, I'm just kind of using the E key there to fill that right there. And while you notice that by default, these have kind of the custom ProBuilder material on it, and this is really nice for just laying things out and lining them up, because this texture here is kind of relative to kind of 1 meter cubes here for the specific size and scale. But what we want to do now is just make this fit a little more within this world. So in order to do that, I'm going to go back to my object selection, and I'm going to go to my material editor. And what this is this is just a little window that allows you to set materials specifically within your project that you can then apply using hotkeys. So you can see all these alt hotkeys over here, and you can set these to specific faces as well as entire objects. So for this one, I'm going to be using this Alt 4 Stone 05 Dirty material. So what I can do here is when selecting the entire object, and of course we can do things like multi-select, I can hit that Alt 4, and now we've kind of applied this material to it. And while there's nothing too crazy going on there, you can see that by default, this material is actually kind of tiling and too dense for a mesh. So now we just want to go in and edit these UVs. And again, we can kind of multi-select objects, and then we can go and adjust these in the editor. So there's this UV editor button down here. And from here, we can actually just go select all the UVs and then actually scale them up to look a little more kind of uniform there and look like it's more appropriately sized for these objects that we've created. Now, it looks like everything is lining up pretty well here, but one thing I did just want to point out is that when adjusting these UVs, if you have some faces or things that are not specifically lining up, like maybe if we had this and it wasn't lining up directly like that, like you can see that those are not tiling together, you can actually go and select these faces and then group them in the UVs so that it's kind of projected along the same. So if we check out here, see if we can get this selection, whoop, like that. And then in this UV editor, there's actually tools down here for kind of combining the UVs, splitting them up, as well as kind of grouping them, just so you can get a little bit more of a layout there and how you can start to line things up and create these more seamless textures. All right, so now we have just kind of a little potentially broken down castle here. It's looking a little better with our material. And now I want to add a little piece which I kind of call more like environmental storytelling. So in order to do that, I'm going to find my favorite rock in my project here. I'm going to say, search all my rocks that I have, and we're just going to grab something like this. Now, what you can do that's really nice is that, you can of course kind of lay out your objects and adjust them, but let's say that I wanted to kind of tweak this rock a little bit further. In the past, you'd have to either export it out, go back into something like a DCC program like Maya or Blender. But now, what you can actually do is you can take a mesh or take an object within Unity and do what we call ProBuilderize. So once I have this object selected, with the ProBuilder window open, I now have this button here. And of course, what that does, once I click it, is allows me to create this selection and then start to easily manipulate it within Unity. So if I wanted to adjust some of the faces or things like that, I could just easily click on these here, go to the face selection, and then start moving these around. Whoop. So I can select one of these, I can move it up, I can kind of move it down a little bit. And what I want to do here is I'm actually going to kind of subdivide this face so I create a little bit more of a divot. So we can just click subdivide, and we can do that a couple times. And again, the nice thing here is that you can make these small little edits and say, you know, I wanted this edge to kind of line up directly with this wall here. Maybe that's what broke this castle up. We could go here and just kind of make these small little tweaks that you can stay within Unity. You don't have to pop it back out. You don't have to re-export your objects. All right, so back to this little divot here. What I want to do now is try to select one of these smaller faces I've created, pull that down here, and then add my second favorite object, my little sword. So what we're going to do, make sure I'm on object selection here so I can select these objects, rotate this around, kind of put it in the rock like that, and maybe scale it down a little bit. So there you go. We've created geometry from basically nothing using ProBuilder. We've taken an already created asset, ProBuilderized it, and adjusted it slightly so that you can see how you can start to kind of lay things out, build things up, or really build kind of final pieces of your game. And there's been a lot of people who use this in ways early on in production, maybe with blocking it out, or in their final kind of completed level where they can go in, they can test, iterate on the designs they're making, go back out and make some little tweaks there. All right, so that was a little bit about the editor demo specifically, and now I want to talk about what's coming soon, what's happening in ProBuilder for Unity 2018.3. So one of the first things that's being released is, there we go, is a runtime API for ProBuilder. And what this allows you to do is within Unity at runtime, you get access to much more kind of easier to use and understand data from meshes. On the far side there with that sphere, what we're doing is we're actually accessing those faces and then controlling them via a sound wave. So as the sound plays, it kind of manipulates the object based on the frequency of the noise itself. Next to that, while it's a little bit less sexy, it is a small sphere moving along a plane, and then the nearest face is being highlighted. So you can easily get access to some of these information on your mesh in a much more intuitive way to start taking advantage of it, whether you're building objects in your applications or game at runtime, or just trying to change and tweak things. We're really excited about where this is going and really what's possible with it, moving ProBuilder away a little bit from an edit time tool into being able to be utilized and take advantage of at runtime. And if you're interested in these are actually both examples on that ProBuilder APIs examples, and these are available now on GitHub. So you can go and plug in your own sound to that specific sphere and see some pretty cool effects there. The other thing that's happening is Polybrush is being officially released. So it's been in beta in the past, and 1.0 is coming out. And again, this is just kind of some unique things that you could do with Polybrush here. And so you can see things like adjusting vertices, painting vertices, as well as kind of controlling things through more complex shaders. And that is, of course, coming out in the package manager as well. So you'll be able to access that much more easier.
Okay, so just in summary then, so you can get started with the terrain straight away if you've got 2018.3. It is compatible with lightweight and HD render pipelines, but just bear in mind you need to be on version 4 or above to be able to use those. What we've added is terrain brushes. We've got terrain layers to make it easier for your textures. And now we have multi-terrain support and also a lot more performant with the GPU instancing. So go make some beautiful terrains, people.
And on the ProBuilder side, we have that runtime API. And one thing we're doing is that we're just trying to make sure that ProBuilder is kind of working efficiently and effective on all the 2018 versions, so 1, 2, and 3. And then we're adding support for HD and lightweight render pipeline so that all the samples as well as the materials and shaders, as you're creating them, just work out of the box. And as mentioned earlier, Polybrush is coming out in 1.0 and being released via the package manager. And if you guys are looking for more resources, we have a couple landing pages for ProBuilder specifically. This is where we're going to be pushing a lot of new updates and features, some highlight videos and things like that. It also features some pretty notable games that ProBuilder was used in, which is kind of exciting and gives you guys a little bit of inspiration.
If you thought like it was super cool what we went through today for the new terrain updates, there's actually a blog out at the moment that lists all the things that I went through today and also some other cool stuff as well. So please do check that out. And then also, if you're into your world building, please do check out the world building forum. We want to hear your feedback. We want to hear what you're creating. We love to hear it, so please get involved.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we have a few minutes for questions, so if anyone has some questions.
This gentleman had a lightning hand.
Is it possible, or will it be possible to use the runtime API to edit terrain within the
So the question was, will we be able to use an API for the terrain to be able to edit that at runtime? Yes, that's actually being worked on at the moment. I'm not sure. So the new terrain updates does have updates to its API that now allow you to access what you previously would have and just apply it to the GPU, so it's a lot more performant. But yeah, you can access like your height maps and that kind of thing, your heights and that kind of thing. That is at the bottom of the blog post, I believe, as part of the updates. But yeah, we have updated the API for you to be able to do that.
Gentlemen?
When you pro-builderize an asset, does that, or an object, does it disconnect it from the asset on disk?
No, what it does is just add some scripts to it. So then if you updated the asset, it's basically just kind of adding components so that it can talk to the ProBuilder system. Yep. Another question, maybe from over here?
So the question was, will we be able to rotate terrains? When I was demoing it to Dan, he asked the same thing. I believe that's going to be added to the custom brushes that's on the Git repository that I posted. I don't know if it's there yet, but there is talk about it. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to ask the one that everybody in the room probably wants to know. Have you given any thought to allowing holes both in the visuals and in the collider of terrains to support things like tunnels and caves? I mean, even something as simple as being able to paint a transparent splat map in a certain area and have that automatically cause the collider to be disabled, ideally on a layer-by-layer basis, so some things collide and some don't. Pretty please?
So if anyone who... oh my God. So for anyone who didn't hear, that was about adding like holes to terrain, to like make caves and that kind of thing. So while there's nothing that is like on the roadmap for very soon, that is a constant discussion in the terrain team. So we are listening, and only very recently were they talking about it. So there's nothing like at the moment that's on the roadmap, but there are discussions, I can definitely tell you that.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Yep.
Okay, so you mentioned that you're now able to load the height map and get it streamed on the GPU. So is there a way to pre-compute that and pre-build that so that I can then procedurally add a terrain at runtime without the instantiation wait time to really pick up the frame rate?
Yeah, so the question was, can you basically offload some of the loading so you can create terrain at runtime on the GPU rather than the CPU? I'm not sure if that's officially supported right now. I know as part of kind of expanding the runtime APIs, it's certainly something we're probably thinking about, but I don't think there's any any thought on that specifically with the entire tile creation at runtime. Yep. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.